Hello everyone. In this session, I will cover the security recommendation that you should follow for establishing a secure baseline configuration for your environment on Azure Subscription. Security is a critical component of any cloud infrastructure. Developers need to connect cloud resources and optimize application performance, all of which depend on solid security architecture. My name is Ashish Sharma and I am Microsoft MVP. Currently, I am working as technical advisor at Sitecore. I am a certified Azure and Kubernetes administrator. I am having an experience of 6+ years in cloud computing and Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure offers various capabilities to connect and secure cloud resources. In this session, we will check security best practices to use when you're designing, deploying, and managing your cloud solution by using Azure. The agenda of the meeting is to discuss about the checklist and recommendation of Azure PAAS services like App Services, Azure SQL Server and Database, Azure Storage Account, and Azure Security Center. From next slide, we will discuss about a checklist for Azure App Service. Here is the checklist for Azure App Service, and we will go through each service one by one. So the first recommendation is to ensure app service authentication is set on Azure App Service. Azure App Service authentication is a feature that can prevent anonymous HTTP requests from reaching the API app or authenticate those that have token before they reach the API app. By enabling app service authentication, every incoming HTTP request passes through it before being handled by the application code. To enable this setting, you should go to the Azure App Service and then you can click on authentication and enable the app service authentication. Next recommendation is to ensure web app redirects all HTTP traffic to HTTPS. Enabling HTTPS only traffic will redirect all non-secure HTTP requests to HTTPS ports. HTTPS uses the SSL TLS protocol to provide a secure connection which is both encrypted and authenticated. So it is important to support HTTPS security benefits. To enable this setting, you should go to the app service, then click on TLS SSL setting, and then you can enable the HTTPS only protocol. Next recommendation is to ensure the web app has client certificates set to on. Client certificates allow for the app to request a certificate for incoming requests. Only clients that have a valid certificate will be reach the app. To enable this, you can go to the web app and then you can enable this one to go to incoming client certificate and then click on require. The next recommendation is to ensure that register with Azure Active Directory is enabled on App Service. Manage service identity in App Service makes the app more secure by eliminating secrets from the app, such as a credential in the connection string. When registering with the Azure Active Directory in the App Service, the app will connect to other Azure services securely without the need of username and password. To enable this setting, you should go to App Service, click on Identity, and you can enable the status. The next recommendation is to ensure that App Service Stack settings should be latest. New version may contain the security enhancement and additional functionality. Using the latest software version is recommended to order to take advantage of enhancement and new capabilities. To enable this setting, you should go to the configuration in the app service and then click on stack and select the latest stack from this version. The next recommendation is to ensure that HTTP version is the latest. Using the latest HTTP version for web apps to take advantage of security fix and if there is any new functionalities for the new version. To enable this setting, you should go for app service and then click on configuration and then you can select the latest HTTP version that is 2.0. The next recommendation is to ensure that FTP deployments are disabled. Azure FTP deployments endpoints are public. An attacker listening to traffic on a Wi-Fi used by a remote employee or a corporate network could see login traffic in clear text, which would grant them full control of the code base of the app service. To configure this setting, you should go to App Service, click on Configuration and disable the FTP state. Now we will discuss more about Azure SQL Database Checklist. Here are the recommendations for Azure SQL and we will go through one by one for each recommendation. The first recommendation is to ensure that auditing is set to on. Enabling auditing at the server level ensure that all the existing and newly created database on the SQL Server instances are audited. Auditing track database events and write them to an audit log in the Azure Storage account. To enable this setting, you should go to the SQL Server, click on auditing inside the security section and then enable the Azure SQL auditing. The next recommendation is to ensure that data encryption is set to on a SQL database. Data encryption helps to protect against the threat of malicious activity by performing real-time encryption and decryption of the database, associated backups, transaction logs at rest without requiring changes to the application. To enable this setting, you should go to SQL Server, click on Transparent Data Encryption, and then click on the Service Managed Key. You can also use your customer managed key, and if you want to use your own personal key to encrypt your data. Next recommendation is to ensure that auditing retention is greater than 90 days. Audit logs can be used to check the anomalies and give insight to suspected breaches or misuse of information and access. Hence, it is recommended to have a auditing retention greater than 90 days. To enable this setting, you should go to the SQL Server, then go to Azure SQL Auditing, enable the Azure SQL Auditing. You may select the audit log destination as the storage and then change the retention days to 90 days. The next recommendation is to ensure that enable Azure Defender for SQL. The feature Azure Defender for SQL can be enabled only on SQL Server and the same settings will be inherent applied to the database hosted on the SQL Server. Enabling Azure Defender for SQL from the Azure portal enables threat detection vulnerability assessment for the SQL database. To enable this setting, you should go to the SQL Server, click on Security Center inside Security section, and then you may enable Azure Defender for SQL. Next, we will go through the checklist for Azure Storage account. Here's the checklist for the Azure Storage account. And from the next slide, we will go through each recommendation for storage account. The first recommendation is to ensure that secure transfer required is set to be enabled. The secure transfer option enhances the security of a storage account by allowing requests to the storage account by a secure connection. To enable this setting, you should go to the storage account, go to the configuration section, and then enable secure transfer required. The next recommendation is to ensure that the public access level is set to private for blob containers. Anonymous public read access to a container and its blob can be enabled in the Azure Blob Storage. It grants read-only access to these resources without sharing the account key and without requiring a shared access signature. It is recommended not to provide anonymous access to blob containers. To enable this setting, go to your container, blob container, and then you may change the access level to private. The next recommendation is to ensure that default network access rule for storage account is set to deny. Restricting default network ac- sorry, Restricting default network access helps to provide a new layer of security since the storage account accept connection from client on any network. To limit access to selected networks, the default action must be changed. To enable this setting, you can go to the storage account, click on networking, and then you may select firewall and network and click on the selected network. The next recommendation is to ensure that trusted Microsoft services is enabled for storage account access. Some Microsoft services that interact with the storage account operate from network that can't be granted access through network rules. To help this type of service work as intended, allow the set of trusted Microsoft services to bypass the network rules. To enable this setting, you should go to your storage account, click on networking, and then go to the exception and select Allow Trusted Microsoft Services to access this storage account. The next recommendation is to ensure that soft delete is enabled for Azure Storage. There could be scenarios where users accidentally run delete commands on a storage account. Deleting an storage blob led to immediate data loss, non-accessible data. In order to avoid this, enable soft delete for blob. To enable this setting, you should go to Storage account, click on Data Protection, and then select Turn on Soft Delete for blobs. The next recommendation is to ensure that storage for critical data are encrypted with customer managed key. If you want to control and manage this encryption key yourself, you can specify customer managed key. That key is used to protect and control access to the key that encrypts your data. To enable this setting, you should go to the storage account, click on encryption, and then you can select encryption type as customer managed keys. The next recommendation is to ensure that storage logging is enabled for blob, table, and queue services. Logs contain detailed information about successful and failed requests to a storage service. This information can be used to monitor individual requests and to diagnose issues with a storage service. To enable this setting, you should go to the storage account, select diagnostic settings, and then you can change the status to on, and then you can enable the setting for blobs, for blob properties, file properties, table properties, and queue as well. Now we will discuss about checklist and recommendation for Azure Security Center. First recommendation for Azure Security Center is to ensure that Azure Defender is set to on for Azure services like App Service, SQL Server, Storage, AKS, Container Registry, and Key Vault. Turning on Azure Defender enables threat detection, provide threat intelligence, anomaly detection, and behavior analytics in the Azure Security Center. Enabling Azure Defender allows greater defense in depth with threat detection provided by Microsoft Security Response Center. The next recommendation is to ensure that Windows Defender ATP integration with Security Center is selected. This integration helps to detect and respond to advanced attacks on Windows Server endpoints monitored by Azure Security Center. The next recommendation is to ensure that Microsoft Cloud App Security integration with Security Center is selected. This setting enables Microsoft Cloud App Security integration with Security Center. It detects unusual or potentially harmful operation in the Azure Subscription environment. The last recommendation is to make sure Azure Security Center default policy setting should not set to disabled. Default policy is associated with every subscription by default. Azure Security Center default policy assignment is set of security recommendation based on best practices. It is really difficult to cover all the Azure PAAS services in this session, so we will discuss briefly about the other security recommendation. Hence, I will brief you more security recommendation for Azure services that can be used in your Azure subscription. Here are the recommendation for other security. I will go through each security recommendation one by one. First recommendation is to ensure Azure keywords are used to store secrets. So whenever you are developing an application, make sure that you are storing all the secret credential in the Azure Key Vault. Next recommendation is to ensure that all the keys in the Key Vault have an expiration time set. This ensures that the keys cannot be used beyond their assigned lifetimes. Next recommendation is to ensure that the expiration date is set on all secret. This is helpful so that secrets cannot be used beyond their assigned expiry date. Secrets need to be rotated periodically whenever they are used. Next recommendation is to ensure that resource logs are set for mission critical Azure resources. It may be necessary to log a subscription, resource group, or a resource to prevent other users in the organization from accidentally deleting or modifying the critical resources. The log level can be set to cannot delete or read only to achieve this purpose. Next recommendation is to ensure that Key Vault is recoverable. It is recommended that the Key Vault be made recoverable by enabling the do not purge and soft delete function so that we can prevent the loss of encrypted data of your SQL database credential or any secret. Next recommendation is to ensure that Azure Defender for enable Azure Defender for all the Azure services. Enabling Azure Defender for app services, SQL database, and other services allows you for a greater depth, defense in depth with threat detection provided by the Microsoft Security Response Center. If you have any question, you can reach out to me by scanning this QR code and I will reach out to you as soon as possible. I hope you find this session useful and informative. Thanks for attending this session. Have a good day. Thank you.